It started on a humid Saturday morning, the kind that makes everything feel sticky and slow. I had just unstrapped my kayak from the top of my SUV and was halfway down the narrow gravel path leading to the lake. The sun filtered through the pine trees, scattering golden flecks across the water. A perfect day for paddling. My dog, Max, a chunky golden retriever, was trotting ahead with his tongue lolling, already eyeing the water like it owed him something. The lake access had been in dispute for years, but according to the property plat and my lawyer, I had every legal right to use it. So I did, unapologetically. I had barely dipped my paddle into the water when I heard the shrill bark of someone's voice tearing through the morning air. "You again," came the screech. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Diane, the HOA president. Her name was synonymous with misery in our neighborhood. She treated her volunteer role like it came with a badge, a gun, and absolute authority. The problem was, the lake access ran right behind her house, across a public easement that had existed for decades. My deed said so. Hers conveniently ignored it. She stood at the edge of her yard, wearing a sun hat that looked more military than casual, hands on her hips, and mouth already twisted into a snarl. Her SUV, a gleaming black Cadillac Escalade, was parked half on the easement, half in her driveway, as if claiming the path by force. I paddled a little further out, pretending not to hear her. I said, "You again." She repeated, louder. Max had already splashed into the lake, blissfully unaware or willfully indifferent to the drama unfolding on shore. I sighed, turned the kayak around, and slowly paddled back to shore. "Good morning to you too, Diane," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It's a public easement. I have every right to use it." "You are trespassing," she hissed. "This is private property. I have called the HOA board, the police, and the county." "You've been warned. Multiple times." "Diane," I said, pulling the kayak up slightly onto the shore. "We've been through this. I have legal documentation. You can call whoever you want, but I'm not leaving." Her face flushed crimson, and I could see the vein in her temple twitch. "You think you can just ignore the HOA? That you're above the rules?" I looked around dramatically. "What rules, Diane? The HOA doesn't govern lake access. The county does. And the easement was there long before your oversized SUV and your aggressive landscaping." She sputtered, but I turned away, giving Max a pat on the head before pulling out a small cooler. I had packed lunch. I wasn't going anywhere. 10 minutes later, I heard her again, this time barking into her phone, pacing back and forth, heels digging into the gravel. Then she stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, assuming she'd finally backed off. I launched the kayak again and started paddling across the lake, savoring the calm water and the distant call of loons. It was peaceful, until I returned an hour later and found something I hadn't expected. A large sign had been hastily hammered into the ground at the entrance to the easement: "No trespassing, private property, HOA members only." It looked official, but it was flimsy, a clear act of desperation. Next to it, Diane had parked her Escalade even deeper into the easement path, completely blocking vehicle access. The real kicker, though, was the small orange cone she had set beside it, like a cherry on top of her passive-aggressive sundae. I laughed. Out loud. She really thought she could just will the law into being. So, I snapped a few pictures, of the sign, the SUV, the path, and texted them to my lawyer with a quick note. "She's at it again." He replied within minutes, "Ignore her. She's trying to bait you. We're filing an injunction this week." As I was strapping the kayak back on my SUV, Diane came out again, this time with 2 other HOA board members in tow, both retired, both wide-eyed and clearly uncomfortable. "She is illegally using this path," Diane declared loudly, pointing at me like I was a homegrown terrorist. "And I have witnesses." One of the board members, a wiry man named Harold, squinted at the path, then at me. Diane," he said gently, "didn't the county say this easement was grandfathered in?" Her head whipped toward him like a snake about to strike. "They're wrong. That was based on old maps. We're the HOA. We decide what happens here." I calmly walked over and pointed to the line of surveyor flags I had placed the previous month. "Those were set by a licensed surveyor. I have the documentation. You are welcome to challenge it in court. She shrieked. I kid you not, actually shrieked. You're ruining this neighborhood. You're a nuisance, and I will remove that access if it's the last thing I do. Good luck with that, I said, unlocking my SUV. And that's when the rumbling started. A low, mechanical growl echoed from the end of the street, and we all turned in unison. A bulldozer, a massive yellow Komatsu, flanked by two pickup trucks, was slowly making its way toward us. It was from the construction crew working on a property up the hill. Apparently, the access road behind Diane's house was also the only way heavy equipment could get to a new build nearby. And Diane's Escalade, right in its path. I wish I could say what happened next was accidental. The driver climbed out and shouted, "Whose car is that?" Diane, to her credit, stormed over like a lunatic, flailing her arms. "You can't come through here. This is private." The construction manager held up a clipboard. "Ma'am, the county granted us right of way through this easement. You were notified." "No one notified me of anything." She shrieked again, but it didn't matter. The driver climbed back in, fired up the bulldozer, and let out a deep, mechanical sigh, like a beast waking from a nap. Diane ran to her SUV, fumbling for her keys, but too slow. The dozer inched forward, not fast, not reckless, just inevitable. A crunch, a pop, a metallic groan as the blade grazed the bumper, then shoved the whole rear end sideways. Her Escalade squealed in protest, tilted slightly, and slumped against a boulder Diane had used to beautify her lawn. She screamed like she'd just witnessed a murder. I stood there, mouth slightly open, Max sitting beside me with his tail thumping lazily against the ground, as if even he knew this was poetic justice. The other HOA board members looked like they wanted to evaporate. And me. I smiled. Because it wasn't over. Not even close. She stood there, arms crossed and fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. HOA President Margaret Claremont's voice had already echoed over the water minutes earlier, loud and grating, as she screamed at me to leave what she called private HOA property. But I wasn't going anywhere. I'd spent every summer since I was a kid fishing on this very dock, and just because she'd decided to throw her weight around didn't mean I was about to roll over. "You don't have the right to be here." She shrieked again, her words shaking with rage. I calmly cast my line again, barely acknowledging her. She stormed off, muttering something about taking care of it. I thought that was the end of it for the day. I had no idea what kind of firestorm she was about to unleash. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines rumbling like thunder. My house backs right up to the lake, and I bolted upright when I heard the noise coming from the shoreline. When I looked out my window, my jaw dropped. A bulldozer was crawling down the hill toward the lake, not just any bulldozer either. It was huge, clearly brought in from a construction site, and behind it was Margaret, flanked by two of her HOA board cronies, arms crossed and looking smug. But that wasn't the real kicker. Parked directly at the bottom of the slope, in front of the dock, was her shiny black Range Rover, freshly washed, rims glinting, and HOA decal proudly stuck to the rear windshield. It was obvious she'd positioned it there like some kind of territorial flag. I ran outside, still pulling on my shirt, trying to make sense of the scene. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted as I jogged toward them. Margaret turned slowly, a grin creeping across her face. "We're doing some necessary grading work. You've been warned not to use this dock. It's not your property. It's public access," I snapped. "You can't just roll up here with heavy machinery. Watch me." She waved her hand, and the bulldozer driver revved the engine. The whole machine shuddered as it began inching forward. My mind was racing. Surely, she wasn't serious. Surely, she wasn't about to. Crunch. The blade of the bulldozer slammed into the back of her SUV. Margaret's face transformed instantly. That smug little grin twisted into horror. She screamed, flailing her arms at the driver, but it was too late. The operator had already committed. The bulldozer didn't stop. It pushed right through the vehicle as if it were made of cardboard. Glass exploded in every direction, the metal screeched like an animal in pain, and the whole SUV buckled like a soda can under a boot. By the time the driver finally brought the machine to a halt, half the car was submerged in the shallow water, the other half completely crushed. Margaret looked like she might faint. What the hell are you doing? She shrieked at the operator, who climbed down, looking pale and confused. You said push through anything in the way, he muttered, clearly regretting every life decision that had brought him to this moment. I stood there in stunned silence, trying not to laugh. It wasn't just the absurdity of it all. It was poetic. The one thing Margaret valued more than her position on the HOA board was that SUV. She treated it like a crown jewel, always parking it in the center of her driveway like a monument to her status. But now it sat, destroyed and wet, a mangled testament to her own arrogance. A crowd began to gather. Neighbors peeked out from porches and walked down to the lake, phones already recording. Someone yelled, "Call the cops." Another muttered, "I told her this would happen." Margaret turned on me, red-faced and wild-eyed. "This is your fault. You provoked this. You trespassed." I held up my phone, already recording. "Actually, I'm well within my rights. This dock was part of the public easement before your HOA even existed. The property maps prove it. I already checked with the county." That stopped her. Briefly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked over at her car again, now a metal pancake resting in the lake mud. When the police arrived, 2 units, in fact, they took statements from everyone, including the bulldozer operator, who was still looking like he needed a drink or a hug or both. Margaret tried to spin it, of course, claiming I had threatened the community and created a hostile situation. But the officers were more interested in the question of why an HOA president had authorized a bulldozer to operate on land in a legal gray area, and how a privately owned vehicle had ended up destroyed in the process. The real blow came 2 days later. A city official came to inspect the dock and surrounding land. After a long walk through and a lot of clipboard notes, he ruled that yes, the dock was indeed on public land, part of an old access path preserved for community use decades ago. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it. Word spread fast. Margaret's hold over the neighborhood crumbled almost overnight. Her allies on the board started distancing themselves. The local Facebook group lit up with memes of bulldozers and crushed SUVs, and someone even made a remix of her shouting, auto-tuned and set to EDM. Then, an anonymous letter appeared on every doorstep in the HOA community, complete with photos, a legal summary of the dock's public status, and a printed quote from the city inspector. At the bottom, in bold font, "Know your rights. Don't let bullies tell you otherwise." The final nail came when a group of residents called an emergency meeting. Margaret tried to defend herself, but it was clear she'd lost all credibility. A vote was held, and just like that, she was removed as president. The lake is quiet again now. Peaceful. I still fish from the dock in the mornings. Sometimes a neighbor stops by to chat, and occasionally someone brings coffee and sits with me. The incident has weirdly brought people closer together. There's this unspoken agreement now: we won't let power-hungry busybodies ruin what makes this place special. Margaret moved out a few months later. Word is she tried to sue the HOA for damages to her car, but with all the video evidence and signed orders, she didn't stand a chance. I guess she learned the hard way. When you try to bulldoze through people's rights, sometimes you end up bulldozing your own life instead.